Good evening and welcome to the Monday night edition of the People Show. I'm Mark Wallace, your host and facilitator with you here tonight. Charles Thomas is out. We hope that he is getting better and not to worry, he is doing okay. All right, listen, we got a lot to talk about tonight. We're going to be talking about, Donald Trump. We're going to be talking about the HBCUs that have been underfunded for decades, more than $12.2 billion owed to HBCUs, Tennessee State University and Florida A&M and North Carolina A&T are the biggest or the universities that are owed the most amount. They're owed about roughly $2 billion, a little more than $2 billion in each university. We're going to be talking about that and how that can, and certainly we won't know in the aggregate, but based on the conditions of some of the universities and some of the uh, things that they certainly need and the critical education that they provide to our communities, that money is certainly needed. But it also speaks to the largest systemic problem of racism. I know that people don't like to talk about racism. They want to think that racism is better than what it was before. And I think that we can look at many different um, indices, and it can certainly tell us in the aggregate that racism is still very much prevalent, and it is still disproportionately impacting the quality of life from education to economics for people in the Black community. And, this is something that we just cannot ignore, and we cannot afford to pretend that it is not happening. It is happening, and we need to, one, acknowledge that it's happening, understand that it is happening, so that we can continue to fight against these types of disparities that bring harm on to the people in our communities. In one of these analysis, it showed disproportionately how that is impacting Black women. The other thing that we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be talking about the presidencies of the of the United States, and I'm having some technical issues here, but I think we'll get to it. But we're going to be talking about the presidencies of the United States from 1933 to 2020. We have had 14 American presidents, 7 Democratic and 7 Republican. We're going to be talking about how the economy um, has fared and just overall what the facts are between the 7 Republicans and the 7 Democratic presidencies. We are bringing you nothing but the deep dive, the raw information of where the country has gone and how the country has done under the different administrations. There is one that is more progressive, and there is one that calls themselves conservatives. And I think that in a lot of these terms that are used, these are terms that are used in many respects just to be distractive. Because what does it really mean to be a conservative or a liberal or a progressive? Progressive just simply means progress, right? We want to push forward. We want to advance and improve. That's progress. That's progressive. Conservative. What does that mean? The term conservative. What does it mean? You know, uh, to hold, to reserve, and in political terms, some would say that we don't want to change uh, too drastically. We don't want to make real changes. I don't really call that conservative. Um, if you look the term up, conservative, let's just look it up, and then we can deal with that. But we're gonna talk about that, and we're gonna give you the information so that you have the raw information. I told you that we were going to bring this information to you, and certainly we want to bring this information to you. I got to get this right here because it's really being somewhat of a problem. That we want to bring this information to you so that you can certainly understand, because there's a lot of dangerous rhetoric that is going on. There's a whole lot of dangerous rhetoric that is going on about we're going to uh, go red versus blue, and all of this conversation, which in many respects are distractions from the substance of what's really happening and what we really need to be paying attention to. Because what we need to be paying attention to is not what is red or what is blue, but what is true and what is false, what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong. That's what we really need to be paying attention to, not getting distracted on all of these colloquial sayings and taglines that they get us to focus on, that really does not address the real issues that are at hand, such as unemployment in certain communities, African American unemployment, and Black males in places like Chicago and Philadelphia and Detroit. In these areas, in Chicago, Black male unemployment, or Black males that are unemployed and out of school between the ages of 18 to 25, is at 47%. How are we going to deal with that? What's the way to improve that? If we're talking about public safety, we can't honestly, sincerely talk about having public safety when we have those type of statistics that exist in a major metropolitan city on the south and west sides of Chicago, where you have Black men who don't have opportunity. That's what that really means. They don't have opportunity. They do not have access to a good paying job. How do we fix that? We don't fix that by putting a Starbucks on a corner. We don't fix that by putting, just one grocery store. If we spend all of our time talking about a grocery store, if we're not talking about how are we going to have a real urban plan development in the short term and in the long term that will structurally repair these conditions. We talk about reparations. This is a part of reparations. It is a part of reparations. It's not just about somebody writing a check and giving a check to a number of people. It is about creating real systemic structures of repair in education, in health, and employment, and in business. All of these areas, mental health, all of these areas are a part of reparations. How does that really get to reparations? Well, the way that it gets to reparations is because there has been severe damage, severe disrepair, and severe disinvestment in certain communities, in Black communities. If we want to talk about reparations, and I am pro and supportive of reparations, it is absolutely essential and it's absolutely owed to Black communities. And reparations means to repair the damage or to repair the breach. And we are not going to repair these damages, and we're not going to repair these breaches by having these one-off type of development where you go and you build a store or you build a restaurant and think that that is going to be the ends to the means. It is not. It's not. That's symbolic. It's not substantive. And we've got to get to that action, not just a conversation, but there has to be a real plan put in place that's going to deal with repairing the breach. That's what reparations is, repairing the damaged areas. And that repair is long-term, and it is almost immeasurable when it comes to enumerating that into a number. And I call reparations repaired when you have made a people whole, not to taking a people back, making them back whole. Yes, making them whole, because we've never been whole in this country. So making a people whole means that they have very healthy educational systems. They have very healthy economic systems. They have very healthy health systems available to them, just like they are in every other wealthy white counterpart community. There are no poor white communities in Chicago, as well there should not be, and there should not be any poor Black communities in Chicago. There should be healthy, there should be thriving Black communities in Chicago. And what we in the Black community must do in order to make sure that our communities are healthy, wealthy, thriving communities is that we must weave ourselves together. There's an old African proverb that says, a spider web together can tangle a lion. So individualism is a toxic cancer to us. And all of our different organizations that we have that are doing great work individually, and people who are doing well individually, we have no power in individualism. Our power must be collective. We must bring ourselves together so that we have power. We do not have power to impact these areas of importance, such as reparations, economic deprivation, educational deprivation, health deprivation, criminal justice deprivation. Go on and on and on and on down the line. The way that we have been engaging these areas of importance that is critical to the health and wealth of Black communities as individualism has been our downfall. It has not produced what we hunger for, what we are deserving of. It has not produced it. Therefore, it is important, it is imperative that we organize ourselves together. And organizing ourselves together, we will transform our conditions. We will transform how we impact our local politics, which will lead to our national politics, because we are greatly impacted more by what happens locally over what happens nationally. They both are important, but we have got to organize ourselves to where we are existing equitably in all of these forms of government, from our local to our county to our state and to our federal representation. That's what we must do. And we have to understand the path by which, or the best path that we have by which we have to proceed in order to get there. That's why it is going to be very important that I want to lay out to you the differences of Republican presidencies, which are Republican policies, and Democratic presidencies and Democratic policies, and how the difference between those two, and which of the two is the best path that we can infiltrate to impact, to make better towards our community. All of the other fodder and all of the other talk that has no basis in fact or basis in truth, and purely basis of emotions and frustration, is not going to get us anywhere. So I thought that it was important, that it is important, especially at this time as we are 220 days or 219 days shy of the 2024 election. And we have to make certain that we do not allow for our frustrations to get in the way of better reasoning. And that's why it is important, why we have to do a deep dive, and we have to look at the facts, and we have to find out and understand the best path for us to get to our goals. Number one, we must organize. Number one, we have to organize. We have to bring ourselves together. That's why 10 by 10 to win, the platform to institutionalize ourselves together, is important. It's not about one person, it is about a bunch of us. It is about all of us. Bringing ourselves together in a unionized, united, institutionalized fashion that we can impact public representative offices at every level that we need to be in order to bring forth legislation that translates into resources and money invested in our communities, not in one-offs, but in a holistic plan of billions of dollars in investment in education, in industry, and attracting businesses of industry back to our communities, where we can create job opportunities that will be careers, not just a job, but a career for someone in our young Black boys that are becoming young men, that they have options and opportunity to earn very good livings, that they're not all going to be going to college. They're not all going to be plumbers. They're not going to be carpenters. They're not going to be electricians. But there are manufacturing businesses that were strong in our communities. Labor was strong in our communities, that we will be able to create opportunities like that for young adults, for um, adults in our communities that still need to be able to provide for themselves. The same way that they're doing in places like Belvedere, Illinois, with reinforcing the auto factory there, that's going to bring another 25 to 3,000 jobs, earning somewhere around $89,000 on average. These are careers, not just a job where you're going to work a year or 6 months. These are careers that people are going to start and can retire from. The electric battery factory, $2.5 billion that's being developed down in Kankakee, Illinois. We had manufacturing industry all around the Black community in the 50s, in the 60s, and the 70s. 70% of all employment, 70% of all employment was in labor. You could come out of high school and you can go right into a job that was a career that you could retire from and earn a very good living. Many of parents and grandparents retired from these places, bought homes, bought cars, sent their children to college, took their family out for some leisure entertainment, and was able to save for retirement and got a good pension. Now, many of our communities are surviving off of retirees. That is not sustainable. That's not sustainable. So that's why I want to give you the facts. So I want to ask you to call your friends and ask them to tune in, because we are going to go down the facts, not fiction, not opinion. We're going to go down the hard, deep dive data that you're going to find out and you're going to hear, and you'll be able to go and you'll be able to fact check it all. But you're going to hear the substance of the path that we need to go. Number one is we have to organize, because whichever direction that we go in, if we're not going in a direction where we're together, we're going in a direction that we're going to fail. If we're not going in any direction together, we're going in a direction where we are going to fail. Period. That is the bottom line. So we've got to abandon whatever our emotional, personalities that keep us from binding ourselves together. If you are really sincere, then whatever is keeping us from bringing ourselves together won't keep us from doing that. Not if we're sincere, not meaning that we really care about the overwhelming condition of our communities, which means that we care about the people in our communities. We care about young people having an opportunity. We care about our public school systems being great institutions of learning for children for many years to come, that we have great educators in those institutions who are being paid well, and we have students who are getting a great education so that they will be prepared to go higher, and they will be prepared when it's time for them to come out into this uh, world to contribute. All of that is important, and none of that can happen. None of that can happen at the level that we need it to happen to transform the conditions of our communities without you and I and the rest of us committing ourselves together to make that happen. This is not going to happen by any one personality, no matter how brilliant one may be, no matter how talented of an individual one may be. An individual is not going to be the liberator for our communities. If that were the case, we would have been liberated by Dr. King. We would have been liberated by Malcolm X. We would have been liberated by Mother Teresa. We would have been liberated by any of the people that we hold as being great advocates for justice. You can go right on down the line. Just whatever the name of the person that you hold so dear as being a great purveyor of truth and justice. If an individual, if that was the answer to our redemption, we would have been redeemed a long time ago, but it is not. The answer to our redemption is all of us together, the masses of us, working together beyond the minutia and beyond the clutter that we hear and paying attention to. We have to get acutely focused on what is important. What is the priority for a people to thrive? What's the priority? It's not in a news story about some personality. But what it is in us coming together, getting focused, and making sure that the resources that are supposed to be invested so that we can have access and opportunity and substance to making sure that we have what it is that we need to have, and to making sure that we have robust, thriving, healthy communities. That's what it is that we have to have. So we're going to be talking about that. All right. So the first thing that I want to talk about, I had to go through all of that to set this up, um, because there's just so much banter that's going on out there and so much chatter that we are engaging in. that we're not even considering what's the relevance of it? What is the importance of it? And what does it do to impact our lives? Are the conversations that we're engaged in, are they life impacting? We have to ask ourselves that question. Are we just having conversations for uh, to be sensational? Okay, even if we were, is that going to make life better for us? No. The truth is, it is not. Some of the stuff that we talk about will have no redeeming impact on our lives. So I saw this story. And again, this is about the health and wealth and welfare of Black communities. So, Tennessee State University, like I said, was one of those universities that is owed about $2.1 billion in funding. They've been underfunded by the local states. Now, mind you, the Biden-Harris administration in the last 3 years has given over $6.5 billion just over the last 3 years, $6.5 billion to HBCUs, not minority uh, institutions, but HBCUs have received $6.5 billion from the Biden-Harris administration. Secondly, the president has sent letters to all of these governments about this underfunding. Now, these states owe these historically Black colleges and universities billions of dollars, and those dollars disproportionately are harming Black women. They've educated half of the Black doctors in the United States, almost all of the Black judges and Vice President Kamala Harris. They're known for providing top-notch opportunities to generations of Black students since shortly after Reconstruction. But most of the public Black colleges and universities have all been disproportionately and vastly underfunded. This is a level of systemic racism. It's just embedded. It's embedded in our culture, and we cannot ignore it. And it is not to, again, as they have tried to distract the conversation, it's not to just to suggest that it is to make my camera was off there. There we go. To make someone feel bad. That's not what it's about. When you have information, you're armed with information, so that when you have information, you can now address that situation or those situations with the information that you have. So in this article, it just says for decades, when other universities refused to admit them, Black students were attended HBCUs, which offer the best and often only opportunities for higher education. Now, the long legal segregation ended. The 99 public and private institutions are modern meccas for Black scholars, athletes, and artists. and many of them are growing. Yet the 18 original HBCUs created by the federal land grants have been underfunded by more than $12 billion since the 1990s. That is despite a federal law which is mandating that they receive state contributions equitable to those given to other land grant colleges, meaning to their white counterparts. This disproportionately harms Black women who greatly outnumber men at HBCUs. Since the 1990s, female students have represented the majority at American universities, but at HBCUs, they trend the trend began much earlier. Black women have made up the majority of HBCU enrollment every year since 1976. In 2021, Black women earned 69% of all bachelor degrees granted by HBCUs. At all universities, women earn 58% of undergraduate degrees. That's a combine of all universities, Black and white. Their notable achievement has come at a price. Black women carry the most student loan debt of any demographic group, while also experiencing the highest pay gaps once they are in the workforce. In other words, they face a double whammy: the higher student loans and lower salaries with which to pay off the loans. Last year, the Biden administration sent letters to 16 governors reminding them of their obligation to provide HBCUs with additional finances and offering a plan to support debt repayment. Of all states with the land grant HBCUs, only Ohio and Delaware fund them equitably. The funding shortfall, the funding shortfalls mean that some HBCUs lack physical resources like labs or housing, while others have had to cut back on grants and scholarship opportunities. Perhaps most problematic overall, HBCUs spend about 57% of what other schools spend on classroom learning, even though the majority of their undergraduates are first generation students. As Black History Month drew to a close at the end, they sat down and they spoke with Ashley Young, the educational policy analyst at the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. And they talked about underfunding the HBCU's effect on Black women. Georgia has 10 HBCUs, the third most of any state, including the high competitive Morehouse and Spelman colleges. Now, this goes to the heart, or it certainly speaks to the heart of the problem that we have. With all of these issues, and what it reminds us of is that not how we got there. We know how we got there. And I don't think that we have to spend a lot of time on how we got there. What we have to spend time on is putting ourselves in position to make sure that we can address and reverse what is happening, and reverse it in a big way. HBCUs, and this article is from the Fuller Project. This is an article that's from the Fuller Project that was, and you can also go on to NPR News and the Associated Press and get the information. HBCUs have been such a linchpin for African Americans in the United States when higher education was very out of reach for us. In any other capacity, HBCUs have served as a pathway to Black joy and excellence, a way to build themselves up economically and have some sort of upward mobility despite all of the other barriers around them. They've just been a place that, as a Black person in this culture, we all feel at home. HBCU's universities. If I had the chance to do it, my sister and her husband graduated from Florida A&M. Their daughter, my niece, and my two nephews, or three nephews, all graduated from Florida A&M University. I went to Nova University and Nova Law School. If I had graduated, if I had to do it all over again, I would have liked to have gone to an HBCU. But what I did was I followed in my mother's footsteps. My mother graduated from Nova University. She put herself through night school and became a educator and early childhood education, and retired from there. So she worked while raising 5 children and then put herself through night school. And I ended up, foregoing scholarships at other universities and going to Nova University, where my mother graduated from. Nova University was well noted for its night school program. It actually was an institution that went from early childhood education all the way through its doctorate program. So it had a kindergarten, elementary, junior high, senior high, and college, all in one building. I'm sure that they have expanded out a little bit since then. All right. So the importance with this story is that $12.2 billion in underfunding. Is this an accident? No, it's not an accident. It's not an accident when this is happening in multiple states, and it's only happening to Black institutions. And those dollars, although that they operate on smaller dollars and budgets than some of the larger universities, some would refer to them as the Ivy League universities. $12.2 billion is a lot of money that those HBCUs could have used to make the universities much stronger, and that much stronger. So now you're going to have these long, drawn out conversations because you have, and especially in those southern states, you have Republican legislatures, Republican governors who are already saying that in Tennessee state, where there's a Republican governor by the name of Bill Lee, who acknowledges that there has been underfunding, but he disagrees with and differs with the amount. He says that it's more like $500 million, but they will point to the $250 million that they claim that they have invested into the university. Well, you didn't invest $250 million when you have been disproportionately holding back the fundings. So that's not an investment that you've made when you have not funded equitably where you're supposed to be funding. So if you owe $2 billion and you gave $250 million, well, you're now short about $1.9 billion. So you just made a contribution to that you actually owe. This is where all the distraction comes into place. And those come into place simply because they're really saying, they're really saying in so many words that we're going to do all that we can to delay even further providing you with the funds that we have now been caught owing to these universities. Because to make whole and to correct is to say, oh, yes, we have not done what we're supposed to do. So we're going to devise a plan to make sure that that is correct and devise a plan to make those investments and to get up to date with these institutions. If you're really sincere and you really genuinely want to work past your failure to do so. You see, that's when you know that somebody is really sincere about reconciliation, or they're sincere about correcting a wrong. Sincerity and insincerity about correcting a wrong is one who just makes all the excuses. That's really what that is. One who just makes excuses about what they did and not acknowledge what they did. And to fix it. So again, for those who want to say that we are so much better off in terms of race relations, we really are not that much better off, because this is not something that happened just by an accident. It really isn't. This is decisions that were made in budgets or budgeting meetings where they have said, okay, we're going to prioritize this over this. And because we may or may not be short here, we're going to cut this. Now, one of those problems in Republican controlled legislators is that they like to brag about low taxes. They like to brag about low taxes. They contribute low taxes to the feds. States like Chicago, New York, and California support states like Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, those states which are Republican controlled states, that Kentucky, that don't want to make sure that they are properly spreading and expanding the tax base so that everybody's paying their fair share. But then what happens is we have to subsidize them. We, states like Illinois, which are democratically controlled legislatures, New York, California, states like this, we subsidize those states. We pay more in and we subsidize those states that refuse to make sure that their levies are properly appropriated. So you have these situations. And so then what happens is they prioritize one thing over the other. And of course, if it's black, you got to get back. You know, the old saying is that they're not going to prioritize black institutions, or they're going to find ways not to prioritize funding these black institutions. So, but we're going to watch, continue to watch what's happening there, and we're going to be continuing to talk about that to see what's happening. I was going to get into talking about Trump, but I think that this is far more important to talk about that because it will probably spill over into that. I told you we're going to be giving you the facts, and I want to go down now to give you this information about the differences between the two presidencies, Democratic and Republican. So between 1933 and 2020, there were 14 American presidents, 7 Republicans and 7 Democratic. The economy during this time grew at an average rate of 4.6% under Democratic presidents, but it only grew an anemic 2.4% under Republican presidents. Now, these are all statistical data that you can go and you can fact check. But we did a deep dive into this. All right. For example, the economy has grown 3 times faster under Biden's administration than it did under the Trump administration. 10 of the last 11 recessions began under Republican presidents, even though the current Fed chief, which is appointed by Donald Trump, Jerome Powell, has seemingly been on a mission to try and produce a recession for our current president, Joe Biden. And some would say that these efforts are to try and sway an election. All right. We don't know that, but these are the facts. Republican presidents have added to the national debt, exploding the national debt, while only balancing a budget out of the past 60 years have been presented by Democratic presidents, Carter, Clinton, and Obama. Republican presidents have exploded the national debt, while the only balanced budgets out of the past 60 years have all been presented by Democratic presidents. Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama. Bill Clinton left George W. Bush with a $128 billion surplus after 4 consecutive years of budget surpluses. Bush immediately squandered it with a massive tax cut for billionaires and 2 wars that we should not have been in, Afghanistan and the Iraq War. Last year, President Biden decreased the federal spending by more than $550 billion and reduced the federal deficit by $1.4 trillion, the largest one-year deficit drop in American history, all while creating 5 times more jobs in 2 years than the last 3 Republican presidents combined. If it were not for Ronald Reagan, George Bush, and Donald Trump, tax cuts for billionaires, and the 2 George W. Bush wars that we were lied into, the national debt would be 0 instead of over $30 trillion. Let me say that again. If it were not for Ronald Reagan, Bush, and the Trump tax cuts for billionaires, and the two wars that George W. Bush lied us into, our national debt, according to all of the experts, all of the economic, including the budget office, that said that the national debt would be zero instead of being over $30 trillion. So tax cuts and wars that we should never have been into have cost us more than $30 trillion to be in debt. The core of our American businesses and the livelihood of American communities before Ronald Reagan was elected was small and medium-sized businesses. When Ronald Reagan came into office, he did two things. He increased black male incarceration, and he increased black male unemployment. When Ronald Reagan came into office, the top tier corporate tax rate was at 94%. What that meant is that if you were a CEO, if you took more than $3 million at that time out of your corporation, anything over that amount, not the 3 million, but anything over that amount, you would have had to pay 94 cents for every dollar over that amount that you took out. So what it did was, one, it protected against these monopolies, enforcing the antitrust laws, which we're going to get to. And it also forced corporations to continue to invest in people, to continue to invest in their companies. All of our goods were being made in this country for the most part. The majority of our goods and services were being produced in this country because workers were being paid more consistent with growth at that time. Before Ronald Reagan, corporate CEOs were earning 30 times that of the average employee. After Ronald Reagan, and as a result of Ronald Reagan, corporate CEOs now earn 400 to 700 times that of the average worker. I think I have a scale of that, and if we have time before we get to the end of the program we're talking about, we'll go through that. The core of American business, and thus the livelihood of American communities before Ronald Reagan, was small and medium-sized companies. Meant that, most CEOs lived nearby communities. They didn't live off in islands someplace. We enforced the antitrust laws very aggressively. That when Buster Brown and Kenny Shoes, you all remember Buster Brown's and you all remember Kenny Shoes. We all, probably have gone to those stores at one time or the other. Buster Brown and Kenny Shoe companies wanted to merge in the 1960s. The Supreme Court blocked that merger because the combined companies would have controlled, at that time, about 5% of the U.S. shoe market. Today, Nike controls around 20% of the shoe market. Small and medium-sized companies built American America and brought us the American middle class, the first and largest middle class in the world. But in 1983, when Ronald Reagan ordered that the Department of Justice, the FTC, and the SEC stop enforcing the antitrust laws dating back to the Sherman Act of 1890, giant corporations began a relentless campaign to destroy locally owned companies. That means like small, medium-sized companies, conglomerates can eat them up and force them out of it. They could not compete. And so they would just eat those companies up. And you could all see right around the 1990s, it started to happen. Where you saw here in Chicago, we lost the Soft Sheen, Johnson's product that we have here, Ebony Jet magazine. These were all small to medium-sized businesses that employed lots of people. We lost 47,000 manufacturers, U.S. Steel site, Mars candy companies. We had all kinds of manufacturers that provided thousands of jobs, careers to people in our communities. All as a result of decisions that were made under Republican administrations. Strip malls and small towns, downtowns that were once mostly home to local retailers and now dominated by giant monopolistic national chains, big box stores spreading across the country unconstrained since the Reagan era, have been wiping out small towns and rural communities. I remember here in Chicago, thank God for the Chatham Business Association. When Home Depot came to Chicago, they wanted to open a store at 87th Street and the Dan Ryan. It's the only store that Home Depot has that it does not own the facilities. That facility is owned by a black family, by a black man. Don Bills, who used to have Handy Andy. He used to have a Handy Andy on 87th Street over East, and he used to have one at 95th Street in Stony Island. And so what they did was, and they said to Home Depot, look, if you want to come, we want you to bring your industry, but if you want to come, you're going to be forcing a small business out of business. So if you want to come, then we need to negotiate a deal. And what they did was they negotiated a deal that Don Bill would become their landlord. So they would essentially rent from Don Bill. And that's who they rent from at 87th and the Dan Ryan. And it became an equitable deal. He's doing very, very well as a landlord to Home Depot. Home Depot is doing very well. They're right there at 87th Street. It's one of their highest generating stores in the region, probably in the state. This information we were able to glean from a Reuters report. So you can go back and you can get that information. The closer a store was to the Walmart location, the greater the likelihood it would close. Persky and his colleagues found that every mile closer to a Walmart, this is all out of the Reuters analysis, every mile closer to a Walmart, 6% more stores closed in and around the store's locations, between 35 and 60% of stores closed. For the most part, American businesses and the communities that they serve, Republican governance has been a complete disaster since the 1980s, the Ronald Reagan years. In the 1950s, Republican President Dwight Eisenhower championed building tens of thousands of new public schools all across America in an effort to supported by the business community, because an educated workforce is the best productive workforce. From the early days of the Industrial Revolution, Americans were proud that we had one of the best educated workforce in the world, and that it in and of itself was a huge boost for business. In 2010, though, when the fossil fuel billionaires bankrolled the Tea Party and were looking for an issue to beat up on Democrats in the 2010 and 2012 elections, they seized on the national standard for education program conceived and legislatively initiated by both Republicans and Democrats, called Common Core. Look it up, Common Core. We can't go into the details of it. Although it had been endorsed by the United States Chamber of Commerce and the GOP presidential frontrunner Jeb Bush, among others, and was placed in 45 states, word went out that it was an effort to indoctrinate American students. The story ran day after day on Fox News and right-wing heat radio. And after that started the downfall, where hysteria absolutely just sat in. The red state after red state outlawed these new high standards for high school graduation. Republican grandstanding for political gain actually dumbed down America. The 2020 version of this was critical race theory. Now, critical race theory is not being taught and will never be taught in grammar schools. It was and is being taught in law schools. But what they tend to do is they grab onto these taglines. They look for something to create hysteria with. Rather than solving problems, they look for something to just cause chaos. So in 2020, critical race theory was their tagline. Another equally bogus attack on public education between this "Don't Say Gay" and the banning of thousands of books. The Republican war on public education has blossomed into its full force. Now, Republican states are trying to shut down their public schools altogether via statewide voucher programs. And what this is they want to privatize public education, and they want to publicly fund private institutions for profit, not for education. So the Republicans are trying to shut down their public schools statewide with statewide vouchers, right? Which they call it school choice, replacing Eisenhower's AAA plus education system with state-funded religious and right-wing for-profit schools, and that refuse to teach actual science, civics, and American history. This is the difference between the two. All of this information, if you want to take a deep dive, you can go do the same research that we did. Arizona was the first to go statewide with vouchers. And Republican legislatures in Texas, Florida, Kansas, and dozens of GOP-run states are considering the same thing. It's quite simply an all-out effort to destroy public education, and we really cannot allow it, as well as to subsidize religious schools um, and private all-white academies for upper middle class people who can take advantage of a voucher that only covers part of the cost. And of course, they can afford the rest. That's why voucher systems do not work, in particular for lower income communities. Our public education systems need to be strengthened, and they need to make sure that they work for all of our students and not just selective enrollment. The only option left for the very poorest people will be the few remaining public schools, essentially turning them into schools of ghettos, like what we see happening in some of our schools, and turning some of our public schools into selective enrollment schools, which means that we have private schools essentially that we are funding with public dollars because they get to pick their own students. President Eisenhower ran for re-election in the 1956 election by bragging that he'd expanded Social Security across America. And his 1952 election was mostly powered by his enthusiastic endorsement of unionization. At a speech before the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, in 1952, Eisenhower noted that the first national legalization of unions in America was signed by Republican President Calvin Coolidge, the 1926 Railway Labor Act. Only a handful of unreconstructed reactionaries harbor the ugly thought of breaking unions. He told the union group, now known as the AFL-CIO, the nation's largest, only a fool would try to deprive working men and women of the right to join a union of their choice. In September of 1970, President Richard Nixon hosted labor leaders from across America praising the movement, as the New York Times noted on September 8th of 1970. When the great issue has been whether to support the president and to meet the nation's responsibilities for defending and protecting the forces of freedom in the world, he said, quote, America labor has never been found wanting. It has always been the first in war and in peace, unquote. As a result of combined Democratic and Republican support of unions, by Reagan's election in 1980, about 2/3 of all American workers had union jobs or the equivalent, with great pay and benefits and retirement plans, because 1/3 of the workers were union members and that they set a pay and benefits floor for the non-union employers to compete for another 1/3 of the workers. But following Nixon putting Lewis Powell on the Supreme Court in 1971, the GOP began to adopt a position in the Powell memo, which included gutting labor unions so that the morbidly rich could become even richer. This is all where it started with Richard Nixon and put on steroids with Ronald Reagan. Their rationale was that workers have a say in the workplace, had, quote, destabilized, unquote, America a point first made by the 1951 by Russell Kirk in the book The Conservative Mind, which was a book that really spoke about how they were going to utilize this attack to destroy unions. President Ronald Reagan, however, declared a war on organized labor with his attack on PATCO, the PATCO union. Ever since, the GOP has been fighting efforts to expand unionization. Combined with Ronald Reagan's massive tax cuts for billionaires and giant corporations, this loss of union representation has led to a $50 trillion transfer of wealth from the homes and retirement accounts of working class people straight into the money bins of the morbidly rich. Now, the question we should all be asking: people who keep touting to us that Republicans are the answer, we need to ask them this question. And I continue to ask this question. Provide one policy that has benefited the average Black person or the average working person that have come from Republicans. The actual policy that you can go to and that you can get evidence and you can back that up. So with all of the banter and with all of, the frustrations that we talk about with the Democrats and the Democrats that and the Democrats that, I ask people one simple question. Bring one policy that the average Black person or average working person has benefited from Republicans. These policies all came out of Democratic president administrations. Social Security, Medicare, Veterans Administration, Civil Rights, Women's Suffrage, Affordable Care Act, the Peace Corps, Minimum Wage, Unemployment Insurance, Americans with Disabilities Act, the Fair Pay Act, overtime, child labor laws, Medicaid, Voting Rights Act, Federal Housing Authority, the American Rescue Act, the Science and Chip Act, the Infrastructure Bill, all under Democratic administrations that Republicans opposed. These are the facts. These are the facts. Again, these are all policies that came through Democrat or Democratic presidents. There's no such thing as Democrat. That was, Joe McCarthy's, when he came out and didn't want for anything good to be recognized in Democratic administrations and said that we will no longer call them Democratic. We will call, because it sounds like they're doing the good things, so we'll call them Democrats with an emphasis on the rat. But again, let me just go through them once again, one more time. All of these policies, this is not to suggest in any way, shape, or form that Democrats are 100% pure. But what this is to do is to show us the difference between the two administrations and to show us the difference between the two and the path that we need to get on, but we need to organize ourselves to make sure that equity and repair and restoration are fulfilled for our people. Social Security, Medicare, the Veterans Administration, the Civil Rights Act, the Women's Suffrage Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Affordable Care Act, the Peace Corps, minimum wage, unemployment insurance, the American Disabilities Act, Fair Pay Act, overtime, child labor laws, Medicaid, Federal Housing Authority, the American Rescue Act, the Science and Chips Act, the Infrastructure Bill. All of that happened under Democratic administrations. And your Republican congressional people all voted against them. But you want to know something? They're all taking advantage of the benefits that are coming out of all of these bills that have come through this administration. Now, they keep talking about the Bidenomics, and you've heard this story that has taken place, or this story about how Dollar Tree is increasing its some of its higher price items, increasing the cost to about $7. And Gene Puro over on Fox the other day was talking about how they had to change their name because of Bidenomics. This is what she said, or she said why the Dollar Tree had to change its name, and it couldn't be further from the truth. While Dollar Tree is changing their name, Dollar Tree said that they're changing their name on, or that they may need to change their name because they have set new $7 price caps. So, formerly known for their $1 items, and some of their items now they had to raise to $7. But it said this year, customers at 3,000 stores across the country will begin to see items with prices up to $7, says the CEO, Rick Drilling, in about the fourth quarter earnings. He said assorted by over 300 items at a price point ranging from $1.50 to $7. He said the vast majority of the items sold in Dollar Trees will remain at our entry-level fixed price point. The previous price cap was $5. At the entry level, price remains at $1.25. The company also plans to integrate more expensive items into the store rather than keeping them in a separate section. Shoppers will find $5 bags or a bag of dog food next to the traditional $1.25 pet treats and toys. And their $3 bags of candy will be found in the candy aisles, according to the CEO. So, what they said was that they found that their average shopper was making more money. So Gene Puro tried to somehow put a negative spin on this by saying that Dollar Tree may need to change its name because of Bidenomics. Okay, well, if that's true, what the CEO said was that they found that their customer base earns more money, that they have more money, on average of $125,000 a year in earnings so that they have more money. So if Bidenomics is a result of that, Bidenomics is doing them great justice because their customer base now has more earnings, and having more earnings means that they have more disposable income to buy their goods. And that is a good thing. Gene Perrell, thank you for pointing that out on Fox, what you're trying to take a negative dig. That's exactly what is supposed to happen, is that we want to have more people earning $100,000 a year, $120,000 a year, so that they can provide for themselves, so that they can go out and buy other items, so that they can purchase a home, so that they can save money, so that they can take their family on a vacation, so that we have real, true public safety in our communities. This is the difference. This is the difference. I am going to continue to talk about the accomplishments of this president. In full disclosure, and I've said it before, when he first announced that he was running for president, I was, I guess, pretty neutral because at the time, I was not overly in any way, shape, or form excited. And yes, that Joe Biden is one of those 400 one of those 400, I believe it was, if I get the number right, there was only 8 people in all of Congress, I'll put it that way. The overwhelming majority of people in Congress voted to pass the 3 strikes bill that many people are attesting to Joe Biden. Joe Biden voted for that bill like all of the others did, including all of the Black congressional representatives in Congress. And it was a bill that was signed off by the Democratic President Bill Clinton at the time. And between that, the war on drugs from Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and the 3 strikes bill, it incarcerated Black men overwhelmingly. When Ronald Reagan came into office, there were only 180,000 Black men in prison in this country. By 1986, there were more than 660,000 Black men incarcerated as a result of Ronald Reagan's and Richard Nixon's war on drugs, which really was a war on Black men. And you fast forward to the 1990s, and of course, when crack cocaine hit hard on the West Coast and on the East Coast, every person running for political office, that was their mantra tagline, is to be tough on crime. We're going to be tough on crime. They meant they're going to be tough on drug users. They were going to be tough on Black men. That's essentially what they meant. And that's essentially what they did. So when President Biden announced that he was running in 20 in the for the 2020 presidency, there was nobody else at the time. And at that time, you certainly, and I could not have ever imagined that President Joe Biden, would have ever done the kinds of things that he has accomplished as president. Not only has he been a good president, history is going to record that he has been a great president. He has been the Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the good part of the LBJ administration. There hasn't been a presidency like it. The things that he's been able to do, we're going to be talking about them over and over. I'm going to be talking about them over and over again, because as Black people in this country, certainly Black people in Chicago, Black people in the county, Black people in the state, if we are going to get to where we know that we should be, it is not going to be by way of the Republican Party. It's not going to be by way of Republicans. Because again, you need to ask yourself, whatever your frustrations may be, you need to ask yourself about the facts, not about the fictions, not about your feelings, but about the facts. And I know that people like to talk about feelings, but feelings are not facts. Feelings are not facts. You have to get to the facts. Who was it that passed Social Security that many of our parents and many of our family members are being supported by? Democratic administrations. Medicare, Veterans Administration, civil rights, women's suffrage, Affordable Care Act, Peace Corps, minimum wage, unemployment insurance. All of these were passed. All of these were all done, all authored by Democratic administrations. What's the point? The point is that this is the pathway that we have to get ourselves organized so that we can penetrate, so that they can deliver better by our communities, making sure that our communities are fortified, that our communities are renovated for the benefit of our people, not for the benefit of moving our people out. But we have to organize ourselves together in order to make that happen. It is not jumping from one side to the other, thinking that somehow you're going to force one side. No. Because the other side is not the alternative, because the other side is not trying to do anything. Now, so what we do is we organize ourselves to be in a position of power, because we're not in a position of power no matter what we think, because we're not organized, period. But to organize ourselves in a position of power so that we can be a force of accountability for those who are in public office, and for those who desire to be in public office, and for those who want to be in public office and know that they need the support of our vote to do that. So what I'm saying is, let's organize our vote. Let's organize ourselves together so that we can strengthen our vote and that we can capitalize our vote to deliver what we demand. And if not, we can be a threat to those who are currently in office to be replaced by one of our own or some of our own that we could hold accountable. I went through the primary vote totals. I went through those. I went through the primary vote totals. And next week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put those numbers up so you can see what I'm talking about, meaning how we have the wherewithal. We have the wherewithal to actually sweep elections, because in Illinois, in Chicago and Cook County, the primary election is really our election. What happens in the primary typically has already been determined for the general. Now, we just found out that the state's attorney race has been called, and that I think it was, yeah, when did I I think I just read that. I just saw it come across my screen. That anyway, it's been called, and retired appellate court justice Eileen Burke won that race. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, because I think that the race was lost because of bad campaigning and because we had and it's really not even because we had a candidate that we didn't know anything about, because most of us never heard of Clayton Harris. But you have to have your trusted circles. But I'm going to get to that. But my point is, let's get organized. Let us organize in a way, not just, having this colloquial term. Organize means that we have to become one body of an independent voting bloc. That is not to say that is to say that we have this block that we've created, 10 by 10 to win, that we could collaborate, bring all of our organizations cross collaborating, and that we create a union amongst unions, the same way that the United Auto Workers is 400,000 members active, 580,000 retirees, and they're made up of about 600 different unions, but they're all one United Auto Workers. And because they are united, they were able to force a sitting president to come to a picket line, because that 900,000 base influences a whole lot of other voters. We have right here in Chicago and Cook County in the state of Illinois more than 1 million. Just that in Cook County. If we had organized 200,000 of that, just 20%, if we had organized 200,000 of those, and we all voted, we came up with candidates that we selected, slated, and elected, and we had that plan in those different offices, we would have swept the elections because of the low voter turnout. There was only about a 26% turnout in the city and in the Cook County Diaspora, it was about 16%, 17%. We would have swept the elections. I'm going to show that to you next week when we come back on next week program, and then we will look at the totals. I did it and demonstrated it in our meeting, in our 10 by 10 to win meeting that we do by Zoom now. And I would ask you to just, if you would text 10x10 to the number 855-909-1385, I'll repeat it again. But if you would just, or go to our website at 10by10towin.org, that's 10x10towin.org, and you can get the text alert number there. If you get into the text alert, you'll get the text alert, which we send out the Zoom meeting link. Just if you would come to just one of the meetings, because it doesn't require any money. There's no fee to be a part of. To be a part of is to decide to participate, and every person is important. So there, we can organize. But if we had just done that, we could have swept the election. We would have had a significant impact on the election. We would have sent a resounding message around the state that Black people in Chicago and Cook County and Illinois have finally decided that they are going to be organized, and they are no longer going to be disrespected or take it for granted. Now that requires discipline, and it requires commitment for us to do it. And I believe we have them both. But we cannot kid ourselves in thinking that we are going to have progress for our people if we don't organize. Now, some of us individually will do well, because individually we have done well. Even in slavery, the house slave had certain privileges that the field slave didn't have. So individually, we have always done well individually. But we have to have a collective mindset in order for us to really move the agenda forward for our communities. All right, we're going to continue this conversation. That's going to do it for the program, but we're going to continue this conversation, and I am going to continue talking about the accomplishments of this administration and the reasons why it is important for us to organize and to continue to support the re-election of this administration over the alternative. It is a binary choice between what is decent and what is not, what is an opportunity and what is not. The Trump candidacy is not an opportunity for the collective improvement of our people. It is going to be a collective regression from the progresses that are really just being set in place. We want to talk about reparations. You want to talk about reparations? Good. I agree with that. But reparations will be going nowhere under Republican-led legislators, because they're already telling you we don't want to hear about it, or some people telling you that, yeah, let's talk about it, but let's call it something else. Already they want to tell you they're not interested in acknowledging this. So that tells you there. And then you can look at the history. All you have to do is to look at the history between the two. Again, it's not a purity test. There is and are no purity test. that not a single individual can walk that chalk line, nor any administration or legislature for that matter. But what we can do is we can make them do better. And the only way that we make them do better is that we do better, that we do differently. We organize ourselves together to strengthen the force of our voice. Strengthen the force of our voice that when we say something, we mean it and we can make it happen. That is what moves politicians to do what you want, when they know that you can impact their position. Until such time, they will continue to provide us with lip service, no substance, symbols, no substance. We've got to do it. We've got to organize ourselves together. All right, well, that's going to do it for this week's edition of The People Show on intellectualradio.com. We're here with you every Monday night at 7 o'clock. And I hope that that information that we provided to you is information that will help you to understand what the binary choice is. We've got to reelect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and we've got to be able to hold them to account, as well as we have to hold the people in our local spaces, in our local areas, in our cities, in our counties, in our states, to hold those people accountable. But in order to do that, we've got to organize ourselves. So we've got to hold ourselves accountable first in organizing ourselves so that we can hold these people's feet to the fire. Even if it's somebody who is in office that we didn't support. But because of the numbers that we have, we can send serious messages, even if we got those numbers together before the DNC got here, before the general election gets here. We can make significant impacts and inroads on public policy as it relates to our communities and issues here in the state of Illinois. We can do that when we organize. When we have raised enough numbers within the body, it will bring far-reaching attention to people like the governor, the mayor, Cook County Board, presidents, and all those other offices, alder people, trustees, mayors of the suburbs, village managers in the suburbs. All we have to do is organize ourselves together, and we can make these things happen. We can make them happen. So it's not an impossibility. No matter what somebody tells you, it's not an impossibility. It's only an impossibility if that's what you put into your mind and you don't act toward it. When you say can't, then what you have already done is communicated in your mind not to move forward, to sit down. That's what can't does. When you say I can't, then you have already conceded. But there is no can't. There is no quitting. There's nothing that we can't do. If we determine and discipline ourselves to do it, we will make it happen. All right, that's going to do it for this week's edition of the People's Show right here on intellectualradio.com. We are on Instagram, YouTube, X, formerly known as Twitter, as well as Facebook Live. So I want to thank you all for joining us this week, and we'll be back with you next week for